Welcome. This is New Hope Celebrates History, Artists and Authors Lecture Series. My name is John Dwyer. I am your host. This is episode number 2. We're so excited bringing this to you. This is where we're going to be talking about our history, gay history, but most particularly history that involves New Hope in Pennsylvania, in gay life. There's so much to talk about here. And we want to make it broad because we think that it's important for you to know about who we were as gay people, who we are, and where we're going. We live in a time where it seems like there's more and more that, ignorance is in our way, isn't it? Whether we're talking about COVID or elections or this or that, we need to know more, and that is one of the purposes of this lecture series. Now, if you missed the first one, that was with Bob Egan, and it was a great lecture that Bob gave about Odette Myrtle. She came here and founded Odette's, which was a fabulous cabaret that all of the people from the Bucks County Playhouse came and they entertained us and all. And this is episode number 2, and we have a great guest here. We have Damian McNicholls. Damian McNicholls is from Bucks County. He's from Tinicum, and he wrote 3 amazing books. I have his entire oeuvre. I've been waiting to say that word. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I get to say the word oeuvre not so often, so I wanted to say it. I have Twisted Agenda by Damian McNicholls, The Moment of Truth, which is a book that has a little bit of a feminist bent to it, really worth reading, and A Son Called Gabriel, which is the one that we will be talking about most today. A Son Called Gabriel is a story about a young man growing up in Northern Ireland. It has similarities to Damian's life, and we're going to be talking a bit about, or Damian will be talking, about the book and about his own life. Now, why should we care about what went on in Ireland being gay? What does it have to do with us? Well, let me tell you. When I first came to New York, I went to the St. Patrick's Day Parade in 1976. And it was just about being Irish. And there were green bagels being given out, and everyone was drinking green beer and people getting drunk early. Good times. But then in 1991, a gay group wanted to join the parade. They weren't allowed because it's the St. Patrick's Day Parade. It's religion stepping in that's part of the parade. The Irish culture and religion are very close. Ireland is a Catholic country. Now, Damian is from Northern Ireland, where there were the Irish Troubles, the Protestants against the Catholics, a lot of civil unrest. One of the influences that occurred during the Irish Troubles were they were very much affected by our civil rights issues that were going on in the 1960s and the 1970s. And that includes gay rights. And he'll be talking about the gay rights issues and marriage equalities that really didn't come to the forefront until later in the 20th century and the 21st century. He'll be talking about all of that. But let me give you some shameless plugs about this book, A Son Called Gabriel. It's laugh out funny. You'll recognize yourself in it. If you're a gay man, I had laugh out loud moments. I was sitting in my bed, drinking a little bit of tea, actually kombucha, because I'm gay and I'm liberal. And I was reading the book, and I'm just there. My dogs are looking at me because I'm reading about Gabriel plaiting a doll's hair, and his mother just wondering what is that all about. His doing a little bit of a dress up. It's funny. It's laugh out loud funny. It's this huge read. It was a finalist for a Lambda book award. It's got so much praise. So I hope that you go out and buy the book, which you can get at Farley's or the La Haska bookshop or the Doylestown bookshop. It's good to buy local. Or you can pick it up at the library. But any of these books are a good read. Get the oeuvre, like I did. But I guess at this moment, we should actually hear from the man of the hour. So let's turn it over to Damian McNicholls. Here he is.
Hi there, everybody. Well, you've heard of An Englishman in New York, which was Sting. I'm basically an Irishman in Bucks County, and I came to Bucks County by accident. I'll tell you about that towards the end. But what I really want to discuss tonight is about growing up in a community that really has got injustice at the core of its heart. The reason that I am glad New Hope Celebrates asked me to come tonight, not only because I explore being a gay young boy growing up on Ireland in a Son Called Gabriel, but because in the last 4 years, America has undergone an incredible experiment, not an experiment that we love, but it is one where most Americans are now woken up to the possibility of what can happen when there is injustice or the threat to democracy and society. And we'll probably be living with this during the new Biden administration. And Bucks County, I'm very proud to say, is one of the important Pennsylvania states that gave Joe Biden the 20 electoral votes that helped give him the presidency. I grew up in Northern Ireland. I was born in the cusp of the 60s. And the Ireland that I grew up in was Northern Ireland, which was, you can't really call it Ireland. It was always, it's a fake province. It was created in the 1920s as a result of strife, and the United Kingdom became the Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I grew up as a young boy in a rural environment. I grew up in sheep-pocked hills in beautiful mountains that blazed with heather. But the reason that I did grow up there was because I was born a Roman Catholic, and all the pristine, wealthy agricultural land was settled by the Protestants during a period in Irish history called the Plantation of Ulster. And the Catholics were the natives. The Scots-Irish that you'll no doubt have heard of, and many settled in Appalachia. Those were the poorer Scots-Irish, but the wealthy ones that came over were required to build castles that were called bonds with large walls around them. And the native Irish, they had been expelled from their own castles, the clans, like the Mullins, the Callahans, they were all expelled from their castles and made into peasants, which as a result, when people talk about the aristocracy and commoners, I find it hysterical because the Roman Catholics themselves became dirt poor peasants as a result of the British invasion during the plantation, and those aristocrats became the peasants, and the peasants that came over from Scotland became the Anglo-Irish aristocrats. So it's all pretty crazy, and luckily that's one part of the United States that we got right, that we don't have a class system. It's basically based on economics. But there were two wars going on in my head as I was growing up in the 70s. One was the outer war, which was represented and called the Troubles. And the other was an inner war within myself as a result of my Catholic and conservative upbringing, where I found out that I was growing up as a young gay man. I've decided to talk about both separately because although they're intertwined when I was growing up as a boy, it's easier basically to talk about first the political situation and how that may in the United States become very similar if we go down the path of hating each other in red and blue states. And then I will talk about what it was like to grow up as a gay man. And people think today, even in the United States, it's easy for young people to come out. It certainly is not. It's different. I say again, it's different. My nephew, Ryan, came out a few years ago, and he would not have had the experience I had growing up because society had become a lot more tolerant. But at the same time, there are kids in New York, there are kids in Kentucky who are being thrown out every day of their homes by parents who are charged with unconditional love, that do not give their flesh and blood children that unconditional love. And Cyndi Lauper today was out on the streets of New York gathering money for young kids who are thrown, lesbian and gay and transgender and kids, and bisexual, I'm sure too, who are thrown out on the streets by their own families, and they have to go to shelters that are run by gay and the city groups to provide them shelter. Northern Ireland Troubles started in 1969. I was about 9 at that time. And what happened was, it was based on the Martin Luther King premise, civil rights protest without violence. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights Protest began as a peaceful organization based very much on his principles. And the top civil rights people of that time absolutely stated that they were following that model. As a result, people would actually, Catholics who were discriminated against, and how I will outline how they were discriminated against. What it meant to grow up Catholic in Northern Ireland was that you weren't allowed to have proper housing. Any people that required government housing, it was allocated all to the Protestant working class. It wasn't given to Catholics. It wasn't allowed. Jobs, there was complete job discrimination. Nobody could hold high up posts in the government if you were Catholic, and they knew by your name, by the way. Mine might have been a little confusing because I was McNicholls, which is a Scottish-Irish name. Apparently, I found out through Ancestry that I have a lot of Scottish blood as well. But Irish Catholic names were very well known by the Protestant decision makers, and they would discriminate and not allow you to interview, or if they interviewed you, you definitely had no chance of getting middle management, upper management jobs or jobs in the civil service. Voting. We talk here about one man, one vote. Northern Ireland did not adhere to that principle. Number one, you had to be a landowner to be allowed to vote. My parents did have land and a home. They had their own home, so they did have a vote. But Catholics who were renters had no vote. And just to make sure that the Protestant majority controlled, because Northern Ireland was known as a Protestant state for a Protestant people, the Northern Ireland Unionists, which generally was the Protestant government, there were no Catholics in government, they actually allocated extra votes to Protestant farmers and rich, wealthy Protestant corporations. Even corporations had a vote when Catholics who didn't own a home didn't. Also, the courts were packed. And by that, I mean juries were selected from Protestant areas when it was a Catholic defendant. And I know this firsthand because my brother had a road accident when he was 13, and he was rendered with brain damage that endures to this day. He had to leave our Catholic grammar school because his academics were no longer viable, and he had to do practical training. Thankfully, he was able to see through that, and he actually married and had children and has a job, a civil service job. But my parents went to court because it was the driver of a Protestant firm who crashed into him. And the jury was stacked against my parents. They came from a very Protestant area of Belfast called the Shankill. As soon as they heard the name Seamus McNicholls, they knew he was Catholic. And as a result, my parents were unable to gain any money from a hugely wealthy company to cater for my brother's upkeep for his physiotherapy. They appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and again it was shot down. And they had the option of going to what was then known as the House of Lords, but that, which is now the United Kingdom Supreme Court. But it was so prohibitively expensive, my parents couldn't do it. So we just had to bite the discrimination and injustice and actually just move on. And another area where it affected Catholics was in biased policing. The police would constantly stop people. They would not come to the aid of Catholic families as fast as they would for Protestant families. So that's how discrimination manifested itself. And you can imagine that there was a melting pot of hatred and anger amongst my parents and that generation and the older generations who had been sent to the hills to run their mountain farms and become bricklayers, become plasterers. That's why over here in America, most of the Irish that come over here are very good artisans, and it's because they actually learned those skills because they had no option in those days. In my father's day, he had to go to a Protestant school where Catholicism would be expunged. But as a result, I went to a Catholic school because they founded excellent Catholic schools by the time I was going through the educational system, so that we could have our own culture. It wouldn't be extinguished. The trouble started as a result of people taking to the streets. My parents were in their 30s. Of course, then I thought they were in their 50s because I was so young, but they took to the streets and they went on marches. And as a result, they wanted to actually ensure that we would have a future, that we wouldn't have to leave home like many Irish immigrants. They wanted us to be at home to build up an Ireland for ourselves. Why I came was obviously for different reasons, but as a result, their peaceful protests were met with police brutality. They were beaten with batons, not shot, because the police at that time were not allowed to carry weapons as they do over here. As a result, there was a growth of Protestant paramilitary groups that sprang up called the UDR, and they despised Catholics and they harassed them at every turn. So within that fomenting society, the violence started up, and petrol bombs began to fly. I should point out that the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, although it was Catholic based, they actually had a wider picture in mind. They saw the working class Protestants being discriminated against in the same way that Catholics were, but not as much, but they saw that they were being trodden upon too. So they extended and wanted to bring them into the group to strengthen the voice. But unfortunately, as a result of the British overseers and the Protestant aristocrats, if you want to call it, but they were very wealthy farmers and businessmen, they fomented war or the strife between the Catholics and these working class Protestants so that they could keep the Protestant working class at bay too. So they could never see that they were being discriminated against. It was a classic divide and conquer situation. So what happened was then that Britain could not bear the violence that was occurring, the deaths, and they decided to impose direct rule in Northern Ireland in the 70s when I was a teenager. And they cancelled the Stormont government and brought in and created the position of a Northern Ireland minister, who actually flew in from London, took office at a castle near Hollywood Castle near Belfast, and they would actually then act as what you would call a ruler for Westminster, and he would dispense, and it was never a she until the 90s, but he would always dispense what was required, what was to be done. As a result of this direct rule, then the IRA, which was a peaceful group at that time, split into two, the officials and the provisionals. The provisionals were much more militaristic in their training, much more skilled, and they decided to take the British soldiers on, and there was the onset of what you would call a war. It was it wasn't a civil war, but it was a civil war against the Protestant paramilitaries and the British forces. And this created more violence. There were bombs, there were people murdered. I remember as a kid, my mom would take us up to Belfast to shop. She loved her day's shopping. We despised it, but we would go and we had to be searched as we went into every store. We would be down the street and a bomb could go off and we had to leave and go home, as Mum was very frightened. There were more protests, and my mum and dad actually attended what is known as Bloody Sunday, which was a day when 14 Catholics were shot dead by the British Army just because they were told to fire on the Catholic population who were at the protest to bring it to an end. And I was 11 at that time, and I remember my mom and dad speeding through the gate of our home. We lived in this beautiful glen, and my mom got out of the car and she was covered in blood. Her knees were bleeding, her elbows were bleeding, her face was bleeding. And I was so shocked, it went straight to my heart. And I learned that she had crawled all along the pavements, trying to avoid the bullets as they were flying. And that's where 14 people were killed. But it had a very sobering effect on me growing up. And as a result, I became extremely vigilant about rights, civil rights. I became very vigilant about injustice, bigotry. And it formed the backbone of my morality, I would say. So that's in a nutshell the Northern Ireland political situation I grew up in. Until in 1998, George Mitchell was appointed by the Clinton administration, went over to Northern Ireland and managed, I don't know how to this day, but got the extreme DUP, which is an evangelical group that now is the majority in Northern Ireland. They represent the majority party. They get their degrees from Bob Jones University. They're crazy evangelicals, but they have the power there. And he got them and the Sinn Féin, which is on the very left of Irish Catholic politics or nationalist politics, and he got them to actually agree. And Britain, the Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland then formed an assembly. But more about that as I talk now and move on to growing up gay. I did refer to the fact that I was growing up with an internal war within me. And that war was, I knew I was different. And to be different in Northern Ireland is not cool. When did I first know I was different and that I did not really look at girls or women? It was 6. I was 6. Children know very early on. I'm not saying all children do, but some do. And what happened was, that's me on the right, extreme right, as a child at primary school, my sister Deirdre, and my brother Seamus, who had the terrible road accident. I have 2 other siblings, Siobhan and Dermot, but they're not in the picture. They were absolutely babies at that point. But I actually found out I was a young gay man, or I was growing up different at 6 on a beach. And I'm going to read from A Son Called Gabriel, just a very basic paragraph where I discovered this. And I often thought about it. When you're heterosexual, there isn't a defining moment when you know that you're growing up heterosexual. The pendulum is set that that's the norm. But for gay people, gay men, lesbians, bisexual, transgender, there is a moment, I believe, in the majority of our lives where there's one moment that crystallizes, and this was mine. I put it in my novel, even though it's not a memoir. A man in jet black swimming trunks walked toward us. He stopped beside a woman sitting a few feet in front of me and talked to her as he picked up a towel, rubbed his wet hair a little, and then flipped it over his head to dry his back. His body was a healthy brown, and water droplets glittered like tiny diamonds over his legs and chest. I could not stop looking at him. I took in every inch. His ice blue eyes looked over the woman's head and caught me watching. He smiled. My heart skipped a beat and I looked away quickly. I pretended to play around with a handful of sand and stole another peek when I thought it might be safe. As my gaze reached his face and our eyes touched again, my heart skipped another beat. I couldn't understand what was happening. Taking a pair of underpants and red shorts from a bag, he placed them on the sand, turned his back on me, and put the wet towel loosely around his waist. I crawled closer and watched as he wiggled out of his swimming trunks. He kicked them towards the girl and began drying his private parts. After he'd finished, he picked up his underpants, stood on one foot, and put the other through its leg hole. I crawled over, stuck my head beneath the towel, and looked up. I needed to see him there. That was the moment that I knew I was different. And I think my mom would be horrified to know it happened at 6. But that's how it is. The feelings intensified as I grew older. When I was 12 or 13, because I grew up in the rural environment, a boy came to visit our local area. He had relatives in the area, and we palled around for the summer. I think I fell in love with him, because when he left to go back after the summer vacation ended, I went and wrote a letter to him and put these little flowers into the envelope. I had no clue what I was doing. I just wanted to write a letter because I missed him. But in retrospect, it was kind of like an infatuation. In Northern Ireland, homosexuality is taboo. Actually, it was taboo in all of Ireland, but I can't speak completely to all the Republic, but it was very much taboo in Northern Ireland. It was frowned upon, and that was both Catholics and Protestants. We were each as bad as the other about something that they regarded as evil. And I am not going to defend my own side, or, well, what I called my own side as a child, but Catholics were equally as virulent against homosexuality as Protestants. Our older relatives, my uncles who never married, a couple of aunts, they were just seen as too picky to get married, ha 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 ha. And they were also kind of viewed as sexless. Nobody ever would have thought, oh, well, Uncle Willie's gay. Oh, Auntie Betty is a lesbian. No, that wouldn't have crossed people's minds. And that's because the Irish attitude in those days toward sex was infantile. I know that now, even though I came through the system. The church dictated how young men and women, heterosexual men and women, should view sex. And it was seen as dirty. If it wasn't inside marriage, it was dirty. Now, how can it be clean inside marriage and wholesome and dirty just because you don't sign a piece of paper? But at that time, I didn't understand that. And I think that the reason Catholicism has always seen sex as dirty, it comes down to St. Augustine, because his motto was inter facies et urinam nascimur. We are born between piss and shit. That is how Catholicism has always regarded sex. I think that's why it was regarded as dirty. So masturbating was dirty. Feeling a breast was dirty. Fingering, well, that was out of the question. And full-on sex, that was called the ride in boys' Catholic schools, and I'm sure Protestant schools, all boys' schools. Well, enough said about that. The only time that homosexuality reared its head with me was at my old boys' school, was for taunting and ridicule. Poof is the Irish and British word for faggot. I can't tell you how many times I was called a poof, not because I was effeminate. I was sensitive. I was shy. I didn't play the games that most boys played. I enjoyed the company of girls. I like to also play with them, but I actually just, boys didn't like that, and I was constantly beaten up for it. It probably didn't help that at carnivals, which are like amusement events after football matches when I was 13, 14, I actually loved to wear red jeans because that was just my thing. I loved it, and I was independent enough to want to wear it. I had the flashiest shirts. I had the best jackets in the area because that was just what I was about. I loved it. I'm sure I had the gay gene even then. I did actually hide it because I knew I couldn't tell my parents. My mother was very religious, constantly saying novenas. She wasn't, I have to say that she wasn't horridly that way, but she was very religious and wanted her children to be religious, and hoped that one of us or two of us would be priests. Not happening, but she was hoping for it. I pretended to date girls. I dated girls all through high school, but really I just wasn't interested in girls' bodies. I had no interest. I liked their minds, but to really, I've been with girls in the back seats of cars and things, and one girl in particular really does stand out of my mind, and she really wanted me to do things, and I really did not want to do it, and I made every excuse, finally settling on the old cliche that I was saving myself. You know, that old one. Some funny things that happened when I was 15, watching the TV one night. The BBC ran The Naked Civil Servant with Quentin Crisp. It was played by the late, he's a very good English actor. And I was watching it, and my brothers and sisters, I was the eldest in the family, and they were watching too. And I'll never forget my father kind of looking from behind the paper, and he said, "What are you watching? You should turn that off." I had no idea why he wanted me to turn it off, but I was intrigued because it was about a man, a civil servant, who was actually declaring that he was a proud homosexual. And the point that my father said it needed to be turned off was when he's in court and he says, "I am a proud homosexual," or something like that. What happened then in Northern Ireland around the time that the war was going on, the civil disturbances, the bombs, there was a campaign, and I was then now 17, 18, and the Reverend Ian Paisley, I'm sure you've heard of, his bray, his brusqueness. He actually ran a campaign in Northern Ireland in 1977 called Save Ulster from Sodomy. And everywhere you went on electricity poles, trees, there were these Save Ulster for Sodomy and all the names or Bible verses to match. And it was very scary. I tried to hide it, but I was intrigued. But he really had this virulent campaign because Britain was agitating for Northern Ireland to come in line with England and Wales. Didn't want Northern Ireland and Scotland's laws to be different. Scotland then eventually changed and they decriminalized homosexuality in 1980. And Paisley lost his war too because following a European Court of Human Rights challenge by a Northern Ireland man, the European Court ruled that the United Kingdom was in conflict with the Civil Rights and Human Rights Charter of Europe, and as a result, Britain quickly moved to decriminalize because they didn't want the European Parliament legislating on behalf of the UK, because that was the final court of appeal once they joined the European Union. That's why they left it now, because they didn't like that. That was part of the reason for Brexit. So 1978, I was preparing for my final exams at school to go to university. And I was under great pressure. I had not told my parents. And on the eve of my final exam, I was studying to try and get into law school. And the conflict within myself became so great that I opened up the window and flung out my economics books. They were flying out all over the garden. And my sister saw this, my youngest sister, Siobhan, and she told my mom. And mom came racing into the bedroom saying, "What's wrong?" And I was bawling on the bed. And I was basically having what came to be known as my first panic attack. I realized it years later. And it was because I was gay and I couldn't deal with the pressure of working to get into law school and also dealing with my own sexuality. So I told her, and my mother instantly said, "Don't worry about it. You can go back to school and repeat the year. Let's get this sorted." So I was whisked off to the local priest, who was a very gentle priest, not like the priest that we've all known before, the strict priest that they talk about in Ireland. He was wonderful. And he took me in. He said to my mom, "Stay outside." And he took me in and he asked me lots of questions. And I said, "Do you think I'm gay?" And he said, "Listen, Damian," he said, "even if you are, you're one of God's children and he will love you regardless." And that was the most comforting words that a priest had ever said to me, and it really comforted me. But then when I went out afterwards, my mum was waiting in the car, and she said, well, what did he say? And when I told her, the car started going like this out the yard because she was so upset. It was kangaroo petrol. And she said that'll be the last fiver he ever gets from me for a mass. But of course, it didn't happen that way. But then she took me to the doctor, and the local GP in a country area had never met homosexuality before. So he basically said, well, are you active or passive? I didn't know what he was talking about. I really genuinely didn't know. I was so naive. And I said, well, it's probably better to be active, isn't it? Most things are done by acting upon. So I said, well, I'm active. And he said, oh, then, you don't have to worry about it. This is a phase you're going through. Here, I'm going to prescribe some Valium. So I was taking Valium during my exams, which went okay. I did fine. But I have to say that my mom could never quite accept, and she was praying in novenas that I would be okay. And I could see that she was so hurt about the whole thing that she asked me one day, and I said, oh, Mom, I'm cured. So she went for years thinking that I had been cured, and I didn't have the nerve to tell her until I was older, which is for another day. So I went off to university, to law school in Cardiff, and as a naive young Northern Irish boy, child of the Troubles, meeting all these sophisticated English people who went to public school, spoke with frightfully proper accents, and it was quite an experience. It was almost like unnerving, but I did manage. I mean, academically, I did very well, but I didn't come out to myself for 2 years. Law school was 3 years, and for 2 years, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I had my first experience with a woman then. I actually had full sex, and I knew then that it definitely had no effect on me. So on my third year, I went off to a gay club, and it was one of those main street of Cardiff, a beautiful street, but you had to walk down the street, and then there was a dark alcove, and you just basically had to leap into the dark, ring the bell, and then, but I didn't know that the door swung out, and I was terrified some of my classmates, my law school mates, would see me as the door swung out and I was out on the street again. But I went into the bar, and it was a nightclub in the days of Saturday Night Fever, and they had a flashing dancing floor, which I'd never seen before. And a terrible smell, which I later realized was poppers, but they were smashing them in these little vials. I had no idea what it was. I thought people were dancing in dirty socks. And but at the bar, these men who were in their 40s and 50s, and I walked up, I was so nervous, and one beckoned to me, and he brought me over, and he started talking to his friends as Mary and Kate and Jane. I was repulsed, absolutely repulsed. Was I a gay man and I was going to become like that? So I shrank away from him, and I was in the darkness of a pole, and then looking out on the floor, I saw a law school friend. He was in my tutorial class. His name was Simon, and he was dancing with one of our law professors who was a viscount, and they were dating, and I couldn't believe it. I was like completely and absolutely shocked. But that really made me feel good, because then I started dancing with them. And I never left the club after that. Every Saturday night I was there. So that's basically was my coming out. And kids really today, it's easier for a lot of kids, but I think we mustn't generalize. There are many children, young men, young women, who still have it very tough accepting that they're different, because their families do not love them. As my parents, I have to say, loved me. They gave me, the love that they gave me was genuine, and it was, there were no conditions, and they would never have thrown me from the home. Now I know in hindsight, if I'd come out and been brave to my mum and said I am gay, as kids today would, I would still have been loved and my mum would have loved me. But that's the same is not so today in modern America and in Ireland and England. Gay marriage, quickly segueing for a few minutes, in Ireland came much later. There's two Irelands. There's the island of the Republic and there's the Northern Ireland issue. It came to Northern Ireland through the back door, no pun intended. But what happened was the Republic was so tired of the church, the Catholic Church, and the sex scandals in 2011. They were so repulsed by priests, by the obnoxious and disgusting and illegal behavior they had taken advantage of young boys, that an island that was already beginning to stop attending church mass began to leave in droves. And then Ireland had its referendum, and in 2011, or in 2015, they passed a constitutional amendment to the Republic's constitution that same-sex marriage would have full rights and recognition as heterosexual marriage. Northern Ireland was a bit more difficult because we had the evangelicals, as I told you, and though the evangelicals being the Bob Jones type, Graham type, they refused to even allow the question of gay marriage for years. Eventually, they did allow civil partnerships, both heterosexual and homosexual, but then the Sinn Féin party, which Catholic, saw all the faults of the Catholic Church, has always pushed for equality for women and for gay and lesbian men and women. And as a result, they passed legislation. It went for vote 5 times. On the 5th, it scraped through. But the DUP, being the controlling party, still had a veto that was granted to them, that anything that would be dangerous or immoral to the Northern Ireland community, they had a veto, so they vetoed it. And then what happened was the Northern Ireland Assembly that came into being as a result of George Mitchell, the Sinn Féin and the DUP, who were the power sharers in the government, they came to a point where they couldn't agree about controlling and governing the community, and they broke down, and for 2 years it was out of session. Britain actually took over, and as a result of that, an English MP who was very sympathetic to Northern Ireland gay rights wrote legislation that was passed through the Mother of Parliaments, the Westminster Parliament, that if Northern Ireland did not have a viable home government by the 13th of January this year, that it automatically gay marriage would come to pass. And on that night at 12 o'clock, they were not in session. It was still under direct rule from Britain, and gay same-sex marriage actually happened overnight, quietly and unspoken. So that's very good. There's many still against it, but Northern Ireland has come to accept it now, pretty much, just like here. So that's basically a little bit of my history and how I came to write A Son Called Gabriel, because I really wanted to write about, I wanted to juxtapose my growing up in a political, difficult community with my own inner war. So there was the inner and the outer, and that's why I came to write A Son Called Gabriel when I moved to the States in '92. I met my partner, Larry, within a few weeks of being in the country. I was not looking for anybody. I wanted to paint New York City red as I'd painted London. I fell in love on a trip out here to Bucks County, and we dated back and forth. And eventually I moved in, and his dog became my dog. And we've been together for 28 years, and we're very happy. So that's it. If anybody has any questions, I would be delighted to answer them. What are the similarities and differences between you and Gabriel? That's a very good question. I would say the first edition of A Son Called Gabriel that came out in 2004, when I first wrote it and got published, Gabriel was me probably 95% although I did not, it wasn't my family that I was portraying. It was a typical Irish Catholic family. That the experience of a young gay boy growing up would have been the same as Gabriel, but I would say he was much closer to me than the one that I wrote now, which is 2017, because I wanted to give Gabriel his own life. I felt I'd done him an injustice because I left the end of the novel in a way that Gabriel wasn't quite as accepting. And I felt that Gabriel wasn't that sort of a person. So the new publisher, Pegasus, who published both my novels now, they allowed me to rewrite it and write an afterword as to why I was making the changes. So the Gabriel that you would read now is very much a Gabriel, and I'd probably be 50% in there. Were there any characters in the book Son Called Gabriel beside yourself that were obviously drawn from a family and friends? How did they react to the book, especially if they picked up that one of the characters were them? Nobody really picked it up because I used an amalgam of characters. I didn't model it on any specific character. I just took traits that I had observed growing up in my life and melded them together in different people. My mother did actually say she read a short story that was Gabriel was based on, and she said to me, "You make me look awful. I feel like you've made me just horrible." And I said, "Mom, it's not you. It's a composite." So she was quite surprised about that, and she was delighted, let me say. You know, some of the characteristics, I think an aunt might have maybe thought that she was portrayed in it, and I think I've had a difficult relationship with her, and she's become a bit distant, and I think that might be something to do with it, but it really wasn't based on her. But you can't stop people how they feel. I've learned that in life. I actually started writing when I was traveling on the bus between Bucks County and New York City, working as a lawyer in Manhattan. I first worked in Long Island for a law firm, and then I moved into the city and became counsel for a corporation. And between the commute every morning, I just decided I wanted to return to writing because I'd always been the storyteller in the family. And I started training myself how to write fiction, lots of how-tos, lots of different books. And then I wrote my first novel, which I refer to as the Cutting Your Teeth novel, because everybody has a first novel in them somewhere. And it was boy meets girl in Northern Ireland, Protestant boy, Catholic girl. Of course, the story's been told 1,000 times, but for me, it was my first, and I'm glad I did it. And it'll never see the light of day, but it really trained me how to write and develop plots. And then I decided I would try it full time, and had the benefit of actually living at home and doing some writing. So that's what happened. Do all of your books reflect parts of your Irish upbringing or just a Son Called Gabriel? That's a really good question, Joan. They do have a little bit of me in all of them. I always like to have a bit of an Irish flavor in my books. I don't believe that you should write what you know. I believe that you should write to develop and grow and take new situations and research them. But I always like to have something Irish in them because my second novel was set in London, and it's a young boy, fish out of water, coming from Northern Ireland to live in London, and he ends up sharing with a lesbian immigration officer. I did actually do that when I was living in London, and I had a great time, and Jane taught me an awful lot about life in London as a result. So there was a bit of the Irish in that. And then The Moment of Truth, which is, as John referred to, a look at feminism, breaking the glass ceiling in the 50s, and the world of bullfighting. To use it, I had to use it because most women were secretaries, and teachers at that time, and this was a woman based on based on a young woman's life. She became a bullfighter, North America's first bullfighter, and she broke the glass ceiling. And I explored feminism in that, but she came from an American-Irish upbringing. So I researched what it was like to grow up as Irish-American, American-Irish. And then my latest that's currently doing the rounds at publishing houses, Kings Hill, is an Irish servant. She's an Irish servant girl who arrives in Appalachia in the late just before the Civil War to stay with family that have been over there 100 years before. She's jettisoned from the Lord's estate, and she comes to the mountains. She's a great moonshiner, and she's but a servant who was sent away. And she discovers that there's mountain slavery and is appalled. At first, she's not appalled, but then she begins to compare her lot as a servant with the lot of the Negro slaves that are living on the farm that she suddenly finds are living there. And it explores that dynamic servant-slave, how much are they different? And I look at American life before the Civil War based on that, but again, it's with an Irish eye. The main takeaway you would like a reader to feel from A Son Called Gabriel, that the main takeaway is that everything has a purpose that occurs in your life, whether it's hard, whether it's easy, and it will actually see you through the challenges and obstacles will see you through your life, and you will work. As you work to overcome them, they will make you a better person, and everything will work out. Yes, I'm working on that novel. No, I'm not actually. That novel's completed on submission. I'm now about to start a nonfiction collection of essays that are based on my coming to America in '92, and I explore an Irishman's view of America and how these experiences have molded me to become the American citizen that I've become, and how I have fitted into that society, and how I view life from that perspective, and how America has affected me. Interestingly, my grandfather was born in Philadelphia, but taken back as a young boy, and he never returned. So I'm really part of his flesh and blood that has now returned back to Pennsylvania. So my grandfather, I think, would be very proud, but he never returned to America after his family took him back to Ireland. What do you see as the future for Northern Ireland? Do you believe in our lifetime there might be a united Ireland? James, that is a very good question and very topical, because interestingly, the party, there's a power sharing now that's in Ireland, and Sinn Féin and the DUP. I have noticed that they've become less angry with each other. They're still pretty stubborn about their cultures, which is fair enough. But there's now, I think, the DUP evangelicals, I think, are beginning to understand that Northern Ireland could never exist as a Protestant state for a Protestant people in today, in the new millennia, because the Catholic birth rate has shot up and the Protestant birth rate has fallen down, so that it's now almost 50-50. And for the first time, Queen's University, nothing to do with Queen's, it's Queen's University Belfast, used to be known as Queen's College in the days of Queen Victoria, but it has become really administered more by the nationalist Catholics now, and it was always a very Protestant organization, but they have become very open and made sure that there's to be no discrimination against Protestants, just because we were victimized and regarded as lower, that they are not going to do the same thing. So I am very hopeful that Northern Ireland will actually become united in the next 10 years. I would think there's going to be a referendum within the next 10 years. And it makes sense that Northern Ireland would move to become part of the Republic, because then it's still in the European Union, whereas Britain has really annexed itself, removed itself from Europe, and is now really an island that is adrift. I have so many friends in England and Scotland, and I really do feel bad because they just don't know where they're going. Because I don't think today in society, modern society, Britain has the resources to go it alone, and it doesn't have the clout to organize its great trade deals with both the United States and the European Union. So I think Northern Ireland will actually gradually unite, but it'll be within the European umbrella. Thank you. I would just like to wrap up by saying I thank New Hope Celebrates wonderfully, especially Gordon, Dennis, John, and Michael. Thank you for such a professional presentation, and I'm delighted to be a Bucks County resident who has been able to contribute in my own way to our neighborhood. And thank you so much.
Hey guys, it's Dan Brooks, the founder of New Hope Celebrates and New Hope Celebrates History. How y'all doing this evening? Thank you for coming to another of our authors and artists series, which is bi-monthly, and we'll continue into 2021 season. I'm here really to pitch. Surprise, surprise. I've been doing this for about 18 years for New Hope Celebrates and New Hope Celebrates History. We have a number of events planned for 2021 that we're very excited to be able to share with you. But like other events that we've had in the past that have astounded many, that they require funding. And although our volunteers devote huge amounts of time to being able to put together these exhibits and events, there are still certain costs that really need to be taken care of by sponsorships, occasional grants, but mostly from grassroots people like yourselves. www.newhopecelebrateshistory.org, and press that donate button and give us what you can. $5, $10, $50. If you can give us a $100 donation, we're going to give you an enlightened community. It was our 2019 project, part of it. It's 20th century LGBT stories of New Hope, Pennsylvania. It's 108 pages of wonderful stories from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, up until 2000, that are priceless. They're from the heart stories that we know you'll enjoy reading. And we're going to give it to you for a contribution of $100 or more. Although, as I've said, we'll appreciate anything and put it to good use for the coming year. So I want to say again, thank you for coming. And please help us out for 2021 in whichever way that you can, so that we'll see you at the next show.
That's it. That was good.
Yeah.